You know that old saying, 1 plus 1 equals 2? Well, what if I told you that sometimes, in the real world, 1 plus 1 equals 10? It sounds weird, right? But in the world of health and risk, this isn't just a brain teaser. It's a super important reality. And today, we're going to unpack exactly how that works.
All right, so let's start with something we all know is risky: heavy smoking. It's it's bad for you, right? Especially when we're talking about lung cancer. But let's put a number on it. Just how dangerous are we talking about here?
Well, if you're a heavy smoker, your risk of getting lung cancer is about 10 times higher than a non-smoker. Okay? So 10 times. Got that? Let's hold on to that number. Okay, now let's bring in another pretty notorious bad guy, asbestos. If you're someone who's been exposed to it, maybe at work, what's your risk for lung cancer? Turns out, it's about 5 times higher. So just to recap, we've got a 10 times risk from smoking and a 5 times risk from asbestos. Simple enough, right? So what do you think happens when you've got both? I mean, the obvious answer is you just add them up. 10 plus 5 should be a 15 times higher risk. Makes sense. But this is where things get really, really interesting. Because the real risk, it's not 15 times, it's 50 times higher. 50. That's not simple addition. What in the world is happening here? This multiplying force, this is what we call interaction. It's when two things don't just add their dangers together, they literally amplify each other. And you know, it's a huge piece of the puzzle for understanding why some people get sick and others don't. All right, so here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll start with what's magnifying these risks. Then we'll meet something called an effect modifier. We'll look at the difference between adding and multiplying risks, untangle interaction from a tricky cousin called confounding. And then finally, we'll see why all of this really, really matters. Okay, first up, to really get what interaction is, we have to meet the star of the show, or maybe the hidden player in the game, the effect modifier. So interaction is the fancy term, but scientists often call it effect modification, which I think is actually a great name for it, because that's exactly what's happening. You have a third factor that comes in and literally changes, it modifies the strength of the relationship between the first factor and the outcome. It's not just adding its own little bit of danger, it's pouring gasoline on the fire. So think of it like a recipe with 3 ingredients. First, you've got your main exposure, let's call that factor A. In our story, that's asbestos. Second, you have the outcome you're worried about, disease Y, which is lung cancer. And then you have the secret ingredient, the effect modifier, factor Z. That's the smoking. The smoking comes in and completely changes how asbestos affects the lungs. Okay, so scientists know this happens, but how do they actually measure it? Well, there are 2 main ways they think about this kind of synergy. You've got the additive model and the multiplicative model. The additive model is all about counting bodies, basically. It asks a simple question. How many extra cases of a disease pop up when both risk factors are there? It's about the absolute numbers. The multiplicative model, on the other hand, is the one we used with asbestos and smoking. It's about ratios. It asks, how many times greater is the risk? It's all about the relative danger. And when you see a combined effect that's way bigger than what you'd expect, that's when scientists use the word synergy. It's just the official term for that crazy 1 plus 1 equals 10 phenomenon we started with. But here's where it gets kind of tricky, and this is super important. The scale you use, additive or multiplicative, totally matters. You could find a massive interaction on the additive scale, tons of extra cases. But when you look at it multiplicatively, the effect might seem pretty small, or vice versa. It just goes to show this isn't always a simple one-size-fits-all thing. I know this can feel a little abstract talking about models and scales, so let's make it real. Let's look at an actual case study and see this in action. Okay, what we're looking at here is some really important data on neonatal deaths, and the researchers split everyone into 4 groups based on 2 things, whether the mother smoked during pregnancy and the father's education level. And these numbers are the death rates for every 1,000 births. So, if you just did the simple math, you take the risk from smoking and the risk from lower paternal education and just add them up. If you did that, you'd expect to see about 3.7 extra deaths in that high-risk group. That's the baseline, what we'd expect if there's no interaction. But look at what they actually found. The real number of extra deaths wasn't 3.7, it was 31.2. Just, wow, that is a gigantic leap, and it's a perfect real-world example of strong additive interaction. Those two factors didn't just add up, they created a situation that was way, way more dangerous than the sum of its parts.
All right, so this brings up a really common point of confusion. You hear the word interaction, and you might also hear the word confounding. They sound kind of similar, and it's super easy to get them mixed up. But trust me, they are two totally different beasts. Here's the best way to think about it. Confounding is like a mirage in the desert. It's a distortion, a statistical trick that makes you think you see a connection that isn't really there. Your job as a scientist is to get rid of it so you can see reality. But interaction is the reality. It's not a trick. It's a real biological or social phenomenon. It's a discovery you want to explore, not explain away.
Okay, so why do we care? Why go through all this trouble to hunt down these interactions? What's the real-world payoff?
Well, it's because this stuff saves lives. It's basically a treasure map for public health. When you find an interaction, you can pinpoint the exact groups of people who are in the most danger, like our smokers who also worked with asbestos. That means you can focus your prevention efforts right where they'll do the most good, instead of just casting a wide, inefficient net. It helps us be smarter with our resources. Plus, it gives scientists huge clues about what's actually causing a disease on a biological level.
And that really leaves us with a huge final question to think about. We've looked at this through the lens of health, but this principle of interaction, it's everywhere. It's in society, it's in the environment, it's in our own lives. So it makes you wonder, right? What other hidden combinations, these 1 + 1 = 10 scenarios, are out there shaping our world in ways we haven't even begun to notice?